Rome, the greatest empire of the ancient world. Over its reign it has fought many wars and countless battles. It has nearly come to be destroyed on many occasions, only to recover and become even stronger. One of the greatest examples of this was the Battle of Cannae. During the Second Punic War between Rome and Carthage, Hannibal marched an enormous army from Carthage through Spain and France, conquering as he went and gaining more and more men for his army. Hannibal even made it across the Alps. However, Rome wasn't about to let Hannibal invade Italy without fighting back. Rome first sent an army to Trebia to fight Hannibal, but they were led into a trap and were defeated. Then the Romans launched another army to attack Hannibal, but they were ambushed at Lake Trasimene, widely considered one of the most successful ambushes in military history. The Romans were being defeated, and wanted more than ever to crush Hannibal the third time around at Cannae. They assembled two consular armies, or two sets of 4 legions each led by a consul, and an equal amount of allied forces to assist them. The total number of soldiers present that day, including cavalry, amounts to about 86,400 people. To put that in perspective, take the number of people at our high school, let's say about 200. Have 200 sets of those, or in other words, square it, and you will have the size of the 8 legions that Rome brought to the battlefield. Double that, and you will have the number of Roman and allied foot soldiers. Then make another 32 sets of the people at our school, and you get the Roman and allied cavalry, or horse-mounted soldiers.
Huzzah!
That's what is scientifically known as a really big army. However, there have been many who dispute the exact number, either saying that it's too small.
Oh my god, Hannibal was so awesome that he beat 100 million bazillion Romans all by himself.
Or too large. I say, the Romans were too astounding for a force that large to be so utterly destroyed. I suggest that they may have used the slightest bit of exaggeration. The Romans faced a considerably smaller force of only 47,950 soldiers from Hannibal, from all parts of the Mediterranean. However, on the day of the battle, about 8,000 were left at the camp, totaling in only 31,950 soldiers, a ratio of nearly 3 Roman soldiers for every one of Hannibal's. It was a well-organized mess of soldiers, from Iberia, or modern-day Spain, Gaul, or modern-day France, Libyans from, you guessed it, Libya, natives of the Balearic Islands, and elite Carthaginian soldiers. Unlike the Romans, Hannibal's soldiers didn't use all the same equipment. The Iberians used swords, javelins, spears, falcate, and oval shields. The Gauls used a long slashing sword and wore no armor. The Carthaginians used 2 javelins, curved swords, and very large shields. The Balearic slingers, famed for their shooting accuracy, used short, medium, and long-range slings. However, the equipment of the Libyans is much debated. The historian named Head, and yes, that is actually his name, argued in favor of the use of short spears. Polybius, another historian, argued that the Libyans used the equipment of fallen Roman soldiers, such as the standard Roman armor, pilia, or heavy spears, hastae, or thrusting spears, and a heavy shield, perhaps even utilizing the Greek phalanx. However, he has stated that Hannibal's forces changed their fighting styles once they engaged with the Romans. The defeats they suffered had nothing to do with weapons or formations. Hannibal himself discarded the equipment with which he had started out and armed his troops with Roman weapons. The 2 consular armies, like the name suggests, were led by 2 consuls, Gaius Trinides Varro and Lucius Aemilius Paulus. Varro was overly confident in the strength of the Roman army as a result of his debilitating hubris, and looked for a quick ending to the war. Paulus, on the other hand, was cautious and rational, and didn't want to fight Hannibal on open ground of Cannae, because of Hannibal's larger force of cavalry. The two armies camped 6 miles away from one another, along the Aufidus River, and after 2 days Hannibal came to Paulus with a request for battle, which Paulus refused. To make sure that his plan was put into action, Hannibal ordered some of his cavalry to harass the water-bearers going to the Roman camp. This prompted the Romans to attack the Carthaginians. The next day, with Varro in command, the two armies marched at each other. The Romans formed long rows of soldiers with more depth than length, hoping to break Hannibal's infantry quickly. He then hoped that he would scatter Hannibal's army and push them up against the river, finally slaughtering them where they stood. Hannibal was quite clear of Varro's motives and had no intention of being slaughtered. He lined up his infantry with alternating Gallic and Iberian soldiers, with his elite Carthaginian infantry and all of his cavalry at the flanks, and himself in the middle of it all. His plan was to have his more numerous cavalry defeat the Roman cavalry, then attack the Romans from behind, and his Carthaginian infantry would then come and attack both of the flanks of the Romans, forming a circle around the Romans and tightening it until the Romans could do nothing but be obliterated completely. As an added bonus, he had stationed himself so that the Romans would be facing east, so that dust and the blinding light of the sun would hinder the opposition. Hannibal would have made a fine Greek. He hated Rome and used knowledge and trickery to defeat it. As the Roman army advanced, Hannibal drew his army into a long line, and as the Romans pushed forwards, allowed his infantry to form a crescent around the Roman infantry, whilst his cavalry engaged the Roman cavalry. Polybius described some of Hannibal's cavalry dismounting and utilizing what he branded as a barbaric type of fighting. Hannibal ordered his men into a deliberate retreat. The Romans, eager to destroy the weakened infantry of Hannibal, pushed even tighter into the crescent, forming a semicircle. This gave Hannibal's cavalry enough time to defeat the Roman cavalry and attack the back of the Roman army. The Romans were herded into the semicircle Hannibal had created, squishing them together, and giving them hardly enough room to use their weapons. It was then that Hannibal instructed his Carthaginian infantry to attack the Roman flanks. The Romans were trapped in a circle, without any means of escape. All they could do was keep fighting and hope they could break Hannibal's infantry at one spot. Hannibal's forces shrunk the circle smaller and smaller until the Romans couldn't move at all, and then kept shrinking. It was only nightfall that brought an end to the bloodshed. Out of the 86,400 Romans who went into battle that day, 1,400 came out. Rome lost 85,000 people in one day, and their army was completely obliterated. When news of the defeat reached Rome, chaos. The Senate declared a national day of mourning, for there was not one person in the Roman Empire who did not know someone who had died. Paulus was killed by Hannibal's forces, but Varro made it back to Rome, only to become the scapegoat for all of Rome's troubles. Many of Rome's allies made new allegiances with Hannibal. His generals urged him to immediately march on Rome, but Hannibal was smart. He didn't have the resources to make a decisive attack on the capital, and a lengthy siege would only end in disaster. These would diminish the huge psychological impact that he had made with his victory at Cannae, for Rome, her allies, and Hannibal's allies. The Romans were in such disarray that they even resorted to human sacrifice, as well as laws enlisting every able-bodied male citizen, including peasants and slaves, into the army, a restriction of just 30 days of mourning per year, and a ban on the words peace, as well as public tears, even for women. However, by exhausting Hannibal's supply lines, they weakened Hannibal enough that he was able to be defeated at the Battle of Zama in Africa by the Roman general Scipio, ending the Second Punic War.